So welcome everyone. I'm Mark Ward. I work in the Future Farming Engagement team. I'm joined by Ruth Wire from the Rural Payments Agency, Thomas Proudfoot, and he's Policy Manager in Defra's Future Farming team, leading on the Slurry Infrastructure Grant. And then we have Rob Davis, and he's a Senior Policy Advisor in Water Quality and Agricultural team. And they'll be presenting some slides before we move into the Q&A section towards the end of the webinar. So yeah, hopefully you all arrived in the right place. So this is a presentation about the Slurry Infrastructure Grant. And so in today's webinar, we'll be kind of contextualizing why the Slurry Infrastructure Grant exists, why the scheme was introduced, and what Defra, and the arm's length bodies are doing to help livestock farmers more generally. Then we'll go into the scheme itself and have a bit of an overview. What's the offer? Who can apply? Eligible items, etc. And then thirdly, we'll go into the application process and look at what it takes to complete the online checker and fulfill the requirements within the application process. And then, as I mentioned, lastly, we'll finish with a Q&A, and that'll be your chance to pick the brains of our policy colleagues here today. And in the background, we have some supporting staff from the likes of the Catchment Sensitive Farming, who can also chip in with answers to those questions. So without further ado, I will pass over to Tom, who is speaking first. So Tom, over to you.
Great, thanks a lot, Mark. Hopefully you can all hear me okay, and it's really great that you're all joining us today. So just say hello again, my name's Thomas Proudfoot. I'm a Policy Manager in Defra's Future Farming Countryside Programme, and for the last year or so I've been working on the design of the new Slurry Infrastructure Grant, which, as Mark said, we launched yesterday. Before we dive into the detail on all the sort of scheme rules and the things to look out for in guidance, and to get onto your questions and answers, which I'm sure some of you have, I thought I'd just give a really quick bit of context about why we're introducing the grant and what we're hoping it will achieve, which will give you a bit of context about why we've set up the grant in the way we have, and hopefully answer some of your questions as we go through. I'll then pass over to my colleague Rob, who is going to run us through the sort of detail on the grant, the offer, and then Ruth from the Rural Payments Agency is going to talk about the application process, as Mark said. So if we can go on to the first slide, please, Mark. So just a little bit of background about, I mean, this will all be stuff that everyone on this call is really familiar with, I'm sure, but it's really helpful to set out the context before we dive in. We know across England, farmers are generating millions of tonnes of livestock slurry, which can have really good benefits for crop growth, but it can also create significant pollution to our water and air. And one of the sort of primary motivations for Defra putting up quite significant sums of public money to help farmers tackle pollution from slurry is really to tackle those air and water pollution issues, whilst also supporting livestock farmers to farm in a prosperous and sustainable way. And we know that nationally, slurry management and slurry storage in particular hasn't necessarily kept pace with the size of livestock farms. That's why we've taken the decision that we want to set up this grant scheme to support farmers to make significant investments in their slurry infrastructure. We know that many of you folks do face significant financial barriers to making those improvements. So that's why we've set up the scheme as one step to try and help that. We can go to the next slide, please, Mark. As I said, so when we're talking about the scheme, we're really hoping it will achieve five real objectives. We want to improve water quality nationally. We know agriculture contributes to water pollution. We'll talk about that in a moment. To help improve air quality and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions as well. But then really importantly as well, we also want to, through the grant, support maintain thriving farm businesses and to give farmers a step up to invest in future-proof infrastructure that will also help you make better use of your organic nutrients as well, particularly with rising fertiliser prices. Making really good use of slurry and organic manure is more valuable today than it has been in many years. We go to the next slide, please, Mark. So again, a little bit of the context about what we're hoping the grant will contribute to, and then we'll get into the detail about how it will work from a sort of individual applicant point of view. Part of the reason why we've been able to get funding to do this grant is because we know it's a really important step to help farmers reduce pollution. And these are the sort of three main contributors we're looking at nationally. So UK agriculture, this isn't obviously just livestock farming or slurry and nutrient management, but looking across agriculture in general contributes about 60% of nitrate pollution and 25% of phosphate pollution and 87% of ammonia emissions, all of which limits our biodiversity by creating effects of eutrophication, soil acidification, etc. And it's also a not insignificant contributor to global warming as well through greenhouse gases. So part of the intention of introducing the grant is to try and help you folks tackle these wider pollution issues. If we go to the next slide, please, Mark. And we know that throughout what we sometimes refer to as the slurry journey, so for the different stages of managing slurry, there is potential risk of pollution, and actually there's good practice that can be adopted at each of these different stages to combat that pollution. And if any of you folks have worked with catchment sensitive farming advisors or others, I'm sure you've had really good advice and guidance on how to adopt best practices across these different areas. But the one area we know nationally where farmers do need more help and support is in that storage area there, where we know there are substantial number of stores across the country that aren't fit for purpose, where farmers are looking to make upgrades, and we're introducing this scheme to help you and support you do that. If we go to the next slide, please, Mark. And that's part of really trying to drive good management of slurries in general on farm. I won't go into all this in much detail because I know you folks are much more expert and experienced this than me, but really when we're looking at the grant, and when Rob in a moment goes into the detail of some of the why we've set it up in the way we have and the conditions we've attached to it, it's really trying to drive at supporting you folks to adopt sort of best management practice on the left and trying to help move away from some of these practices on the right as well. And if we go to the next slide, please, Mark. And just as well, before we dive into that detail, I just want to say a bit about what Defra is trying to do more broadly to tackle pollution from slurry and support farmers to adopt better slurry nutrient management practices. So grants is one thing we're doing. We're doing both large and small grants. So some of you may have already applied in previous round for the Farm Equipment and Technology Fund, which we're offering small grants to adopt practice like low emission spreading, etc. And we're hoping to do a future round of that in due course. The new Slurry Infrastructure Grant is hoping to fill a gap that we have around slurry storage. There's a grant that we hope to offer over multiple years to help substantial portion of farmers to upgrade their slurry storage. But we're also doing other things as well. So offering better advice. So hopefully some of you will engage with Defra and Natural and Environment Agency's catchment sensitive farming initiative. We've got colleagues from CSF on today's call who are all now offering advice on good water and air management nationally. We're also looking at the effective enforcement of the rules and making those really clear, and then also looking over time at how we improve the rules around slurry and nutrient management. And then finally as well, whilst we're rolling out this first round of grants, we're also constantly looking at how we support innovative and circular models of farming. So what we're going to talk about today is very much the round one Slurry Infrastructure Grant offer, but over time we'll be looking to expand the grant as well. But let's get into the detail of the grant, because I know that's what you folks are all here to hear about today and to ask us questions on. So we'll turn on to that. If Mike, you can go to the next slide and then straight on to the one after. Okay. So before I hand over to my colleague Rob, I just wanted to say a little bit about how the grant that we've published details on a fortnight ago and launched yesterday, where it's come from and how we've developed it. We've tried our very best in putting it together to work with as many farmers' organisations as possible to come up with the grant and to work through the detailed design. If you're familiar with some of other interventions and programs we offer in Defra's future farming, we try not to do everything in a silo. We do try as best we can to go out and speak to farmers about design. So we've developed a grant for what we call co-design, which really means taking our thoughts round to farmers and to different sector groups and experts to test our thinking and to improve it as we go along. We've adapted an existing grant we've been offering so far called the Farming Investment Fund, but we've tried to reflect the unique nature of investing in slurry and to meet farmers' needs, and we'll touch on some of those features in a minute as we go through the grant design. And really importantly as well, we know that investing and managing in slurry brings together lots of different bits of the Defra family, so we might touch on some of these issues later on in the Q&A, but we tried in designing this grant to bring together not just Defra and the Rural Payments Agency, but the Environment Agency, Natural England, to try and make the path as smooth and effective as possible for farmers who are investing and wanting to improve their slurry management systems. And we're going to be continuing to reflect and review the grant for future rounds as well. So when we're going through today's webinar, very much thinking about the first round, but we will be looking at to review and improve the grant for future rounds as well. So with that, I'm going to pass over to my colleague Rob, who's going to take us through some of the nuts and bolts of what the grant's there, what's going to be on offer, who's going to be eligible, some of the conditions as well, and then we'll go over to Ruth on how to apply. I'll go over to you, Rob.
Thank you very much, Tom. And thank you, Mark. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rob Davis. I work in Defra's Water Quality and Agriculture team. So what I'm going to talk about is the meat and bones of what the offer is for the first year. The first part of your slide there talks about what it will help you to do, but I'm sure you're more interested in what it will help you to provide. So in short, year one, our offer is for farmers to replace, build new and expand existing slurry stores to provide 6 months storage overall. So you can fit any grant funded stores with an impermeable cover, unless you're part of the acidification treatment offer as well. And the other key feature to explain at this point is the offer is open to all farmers who don't currently have 6 months. So that brings in anyone who doesn't currently have existing compliant stores. But those who are part of the offer as well, those stores don't need to be covered, but I'll touch on that a bit further on. Mark, could you go to the next slide, please? So 6 months, and 6 months is based on what your current herd size is as well. And as I touched on, there's 3 different offers of what you can do. So you can replace your existing stores if they're no longer fit for purpose. So you would take that one out of commission and build a new store. If you have storage that exists but comes up to standard, you can add additional storage alongside that. That new storage will need to be covered, but any existing storage does not necessarily need to be covered under the scheme. So we encourage you to do that at the same time. Or if your circumstances allow for it, you can expand an existing store. So an example of that could be you can add a ring onto your above ground circular tank, or you can expand an existing lagoon. Though I appreciate not everyone's facilities will allow for that as well. A couple of things to add to that is you can go beyond 6 months with your storage, but we'll only fund up to that 6 months. So anything that you fund beyond that, you would have to fund yourselves. And when you're calculating that route to 6 months, you should also use, we would recommend you use Slurry Wizard, which has been updated in time for the launch of this scheme. So if you go to HDB's website, you'll find it there. Next slide, please, Mark. So who can apply? So the scheme for year one is open to all pig, dairy and beef farmers, so long as you don't currently have 6 months serviceable storage. You're already producing storage, so you're not on a farmyard manure-based system. There's already enough storage, and you don't want to create further storage, add slurry. And you use the store to contain slurry. So it's not there to put other substances such as farmyard manure, sludge, or anaerobic digestates in as well. And so what is not eligible for year one, it's not eligible for poultry farmers, it's not eligible for outdoor farmers who want to take it, exported slurry onto their land, and it's not for livestock farmers seeking to build stores for AD sludge or farmyard manure only. But I should stress that this is this year, the first round's offer, and we'll revisit what's the who can apply for it in future rounds as well. Next slide, please, Mark. So what items can you choose? So there's a few things here. There's stores, there's covers, and there's ancillary equipment as well. So for your stores, it's what you would typically have as most common stores out there now. So you have your above ground stores, either steel or concrete, circular stores, or you can have a above ground rectangular concrete panel store. You can have lagoons with synthetic liners or without, so kind of clay lining as well. But we're also introducing into this round as well large slurry bags, but they would also have to come up to their requirements in that they have to be properly bundled as well. Further details on what that would be will be in our online guidance. So I'll refer you to that if you have any kind of further questions on that. For year one, we're not looking in situ concrete stores or weeping wall stores, slatted floor stores, or small or temporary slurry bags. But I touched on the previous slide. We're going to revisit what's in and out of the scope in future rounds as well. So it may be that some of those come back in. For the year one offer, we are looking for impermeable covers. So they can be either fixed flexible or floating flexible covers. For year one, we are not looking to include permeable covers, such as the hexagonal plates, like the balls, or chopped straw, or any of the things listed at the bottom. So again, we may revisit that for future years. And we'll also include ancillary equipment, so allowed to have a working and functional slurry store, so you can get things in there and you can get things out of there again, and then you can spread them at the right time and place as well. But as such, on further details on this, you can find in the supporting guidance as well. And next slide, please, Mark. Thank you very much. Okay, so how much can you get for year-round storage grants? So for this round, we are going to use a standard cost model that differs from other offers under the Farming Investment Fund, where you have to get the 3 quotes model. It simplifies it for us, it simplifies it for you, it kind of makes it easier for everyone. And there's further slides on what those costs are, but we'll contribute an equal 50% match funded amount for each of those costs. So that's slightly up on our usual grant offers of 40%, but all of the different items within that offer will have different standard costs. So I encourage you to go for that as well. So grants are from £25,000 to £250,000. So the overall projects will be from £50,000 to £500,000 as well. That's something that we will test in the first round to see if that's appropriate. And the other thing to note at this point is that grants will be paid in arrears as well. Next slide, please, Mark. So these are the standard costs. I won't go through all of them. I will refer you to our online guidance. You can see there the different amounts as well for stores and for covers. The details for all of these and the other items, including the ancillary items as well, can be found in the item specifications and contributions section of our online guidance as well. Next slide, please. So conditions, there are some conditions. It's quite a simple scheme. That's because when we designed the scheme, that was one of the main things that the farming sector and community asked us to do. So but it's not without conditions at the same time. So like all of our grant schemes, you have to have the stores in situ for the duration of the funding agreements, which is 5 years. You have to maintain 6 months storage capacity during that time. So that means that if you were to make any changes to your herd size or farm practice, you must make suitable changes to your slurry system to maintain that capacity. So that could be, if you were able to enlarge it, that's an option. But we would encourage you to look at other options as well, so that your volumes were reduced. So could you keep rainwater out of it going from your parlour washings and things like that? Could you export? Could you make sure that you have the relevant capacity if you were to increase your herd size at the same time? You have to keep your store covered as well for the duration of those 5 years. And the final one is for you to complete and use, if you don't already, as it's good practice, a nutrient management plan. And that's based on up-to-date soil sampling for yourselves. Next slide, please, Mark. So what happens if we're oversubscribed? So we have been asked about whether we'd have grants for slurry infrastructure for quite some time. And I don't think we have had one since the 90s when there was previous support as well. So and for round one, we only had a finite pot. And there's a reason for that is to kind of test some of our assumptions, but also to ensure that the supply chain are kind of oversubscribed and they have enough stores that they can manage, and the prices aren't effectively skewed off the back of that. So if we are oversubscribed, we'll prioritise areas, and we've worked those out on the areas that require the most environmental needs. And that's I'll go into in the next slide. But before that, I would say everyone that wants to apply for round one, please feel free to do that. If you don't find yourselves in the target areas that you'll see in the next slide, we would still encourage you to apply. It's not your only chance to apply. There will be multiple opportunities to do so further down the line. We're looking for this to be a substantial and multi-year offer to get to all of these stores that needs the support that are out there as well. So if we go on to the next slide, I'll explain a bit more about our targeting. Right, so these are the areas that we have decided that will be our priority areas for the first round of the scheme. So how have they been developed? Well, these are areas near to protected sites, so the habitats that needs our urgent attention, where there is a crossover of water quality and air quality issues, and where agriculture is one of the key contributing factors. You may recognise some of these areas from issues elsewhere of supporting other packages, but I would stress that, again, this is for year one. Won't worry too much if you don't find yourself in the area. Please apply if you feel that you have, if you need that funding. You can find these layers and whether you're actually in these if you go onto Defra's Magic Maps, and then you see on the filters there of how you find this specific map. So you go to land-based schemes, other schemes, and then you'll find other ones as well. And a word of advice as well, you can kind of make that line harder or lighter as well to the kind of shading of it to see whether you're actually in them at the same time. But conversely, if we are further oversubscribed, we'll look at and it goes beyond the these priority areas. We'll then look to kind of get some more scoring in to see who can be available to go for round one, but we'll be completely clear on that as well when we do that. But conversely, if we are unsubscribed for the first round as well, we'll look to widen these areas at the same time. Super. I think that's my slides, but if you could go on to the next slide, please, Mark. Yes. I will pass you now to my colleague, Ruth Wire.
Brilliant. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Mark. My name is Ruth Wire. I'm from the Rural Payments Agency with the Grant Services team, and we're going to be administering the scheme, and I'm going to be talking through the application process. Next slide, please, Mark. So it's a two-stage application process. The first stage is an online checker. So the online checker will check if you're eligible. It will show you how much grant you get, and also allows you to submit your online application. We've mentioned before, it opened yesterday and it was shut on the 31st of January. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the details of what we require on the online checker on the next slide. And so once that checker has shut, we will then look at shortlisting exercise if we are oversubscribed. So we expect demand to be high. So for the first round of the scheme, if it is oversubscribed, we'll prioritise those applications that are in those priority areas. So we'll look at how many projects can be funded, and we'll do that by looking at using the OS grid reference of submitted during the online application of the store's location. So once we've carried out that shortlisting, all applications will be told if whether their project's been shortlisted for round one or not. And so just we'll talk about this now. It's not first come, first serve. We will be shortlisting those applications once the check has shut. And so for the successful applications, we'll then move on to the second stage, which is the full application. So the RPA will invite you to submit a full application, and we'll do this via email. There's two stages to the full application process. Again, I'll talk a little bit more about these on the next few slides. But the two key areas is first with the location and design check. And this is an upfront check to make sure your project fits with the regulations and will meet 6 months capacity. Once you pass that check, then you're able to submit the remainder of the full application, which just goes into a little bit more detail around, so we can check financial viability, make sure you've got planning permission, etc. In place. If you're successful through that process, and then you can enter into a grant funding agreement with us. Once that grant funding agreement is signed, it's at that point you can start your project. So you can start construction and then enter into making your claims, but you mustn't start any work or commit any costs on your project before you've entered into that grant funding agreement. And you've got to the end of June 2024 to submit your full application. One thing to note here, you'll see that during the first stage of the full application process, if you're invited in to make a full application, your details are going to be passed over to catchment sensitive farming advisor, and they're going to contact you to offer you advice as part of the scheme. The advice optional, is not conditional on securing a grant, but very much recommend that you take it. So the CSF officer will contact you to give you locally informed advice on your slurry management. This is going to cover improving your nutrient use, looking at reducing your environmental impact, and also give you more confidence around your slurry management in general. So I think we can go on to the next slide, please, Mark. So we'll talk a little bit more about the details of the online checker. So the online checker can be found on the Slurry Grant web pages. It should take about 15 to 20 minutes to fill in, as long as you've got all the information that you need. So first of all, we're going to ask you some questions to check if you're eligible, and also to provide us a little bit of information about yourself and your project. So such questions, what's the legal station of business, whether you're a landowner or you're a tenant, understand some information about your current management, manure management system, and ask a little bit about your current and planned storage capacity. and how you intend to increase your storage capacity. Once you've gone through that, we'll know that you're eligible, and you'll be able to continue on to the next part of the checker, where you can enter in how much storage you're going to need to get you 6 months, the estimated size of your cover you're going to need, and also what are those supporting auxiliary items you need. Once you put those in, you'll get an indication of the grant amount that you could receive. So if you want to continue, we'll ask you for more bits of information. So we'll ask for the grid reference of the Slurry store you plan to build, and details of your planning if you've already got that underway. Once you've gone through that, you can then submit your online application. We'll also ask you for some basic contact details, etc., and then you'll get an email confirming that you've submitted your online application. So go to the next slide, Mark. Thank you. So one question to pull out on the online checker is around the estimated additional volume you need to have 6 months serviceable storage. So as Rob has previously described, there's a number of different routes to get you to 6 months serviceable storage. And so the first one is if you're completely replacing the store. So you need to enter the total volume of the new 6 month store. So what would it take to get you up to that 6 months? If you're adding a volume to your existing store, you will just need the volume of that additional store again to get you up to 6 months. And if you're, for those of you who are able to, for those of you who are expanding the store, then we need the additional volume you plan to create on that existing store. So, for example, the capacity of the new ring will provide, again, just getting you up to that 6 months. Next slide, please, Mark. So just going to talk you a little bit through the full application. So there's a lot more information on our webpage about this, and obviously if you're successful get through to the stage, then there's going to be a lot more information with the application forms. So as I've mentioned, there are 2 stages. So first of all, the location and design check. So we'll be providing what information you need. So we can then determine if the location and the design of the store is correct. We're going to share this information with the Environment Agency, who will help assess the details of the project to make sure that your storage meets the regulatory requirements and its 6 months capacity for your current herd. So we'll be asking certain things such as the copy of the slurry wizard calculation, details about the proposed stores, location, certain drawings. We'll also be asking you the details about your existing storage and asking for maps to farmyard areas. So once that's been assessed by the EA and ourselves, then if you pass that, you can go on to the next stage. If through those checks your store is not going to meet the requirements or the 6 months size, then you'll be asked to go away and have a rethink of your project. And then you'll be able to come back in, got one more chance to come back in and have that upfront check again. So we very much encourage you to do this as soon as possible, so you can get that assurance that the project's going to be eligible before you go through the whole of that application process. So then the full application process, once you pass that check, again, you'll need to provide a bit more information to the RPA so we can kind of carry out some key checks. So we're going to be asking about how the project's funded, asking you to explain how the milestones of your project. We're going to be asking you for confirmation of planning permission. So I think it's really key about this grant is that you must have planning permission in place before you submit your final part of the full application. And also at this point, we're going to be looking for a signed declaration that stores will be built to regulatory and build standards, and this need to be from a qualified structural or civil engineer. Once complete, then that's when we go on to the grant funding agreement, and once that's signed, you can start building. So next slide, please. So I'm going to pass you back over to Tom, who's going to give a little bit of a summary and talk about what's next.
Awesome, thanks Ruth, and thanks Rob as well. So I know we've got an awful lot of questions coming through on the chat, so we'll come to look at those in a moment. But I just want to say there's already quite a lot in that brief download from Rob and Ruth, but there's loads of information as well that we've put together online on our gov.uk guidance page. I would ask everyone who's going to make an application through the online checker to please look at the guidance first and just double check that you've spotted the requirements of the scheme, and you know all the conditions attached, etc. Just because that saves you time later on if you realise that you haven't spotted something and we need to come back to you. So there's a few bits of guidance that we put on gov.uk. So we've got a page about just about the grant, and that runs through what we've just spoken about today, but in a bit more detail. There's then a page on how to apply, covering the details that Ruth just went through on what you need to do to get ready for the online checker, and then for the full application process. We've also put together some resources, particularly with Environment Agency colleagues, but with catchment sensitive farming and others, on how to plan your storage. So particularly in there, we run through all the different rules and requirements, and also best practice techniques you can use to try and minimise your storage requirements, and to understand the different things you should be thinking about when planning your storage, and also considering whether your existing stores are fit for purpose, where they should be located, etc. So do take an opportunity to look at those resources as well. And a really important one for later on, we have the item specifications, which both Ruth and Rob spoke about. They run through the different types of item on offer, what specifications we'll be looking to be built to. So when you're working with suppliers, those are the specs we want them to be working to, and then also the grant contribution. So there's a different grant contribution for each different type of store, etc. Which we've done some work to calculate those, and as Rob said, they're based on around half the cost as it would cost to build those today. So do take a look at those. We've also tried to be as transparent and upfront as possible about how we're going to prioritise applications. I'm sure we'll come to that in the Q&A in a moment, but do look at that as well. And then the Slurry Wizard tool, do use that to plan your slurry storage requirements. I know there's quite a few different tools out there, but we have tried to work really closely with HDB, the Environment Agency, to make sure that fits what we're looking for in this scheme. And we've actually made some updates to it recently to make sure it's including latest rainfall requirements, and that there's options to cover the stores in there as well. So please do use that, and then do go through the online checker. As Ruth said, it's not first come, first serve. So we have already had quite a few applications through the check already, but there is no rush to do that. We want to get a really good sense of the total demand for the scheme across the country and how much storage people are planning to build, which helps us plan what we're going to do in this first round and future rounds. But that online checker is open until the 31st of January. So don't rush through it, but you've got that window to complete it. And with that, Mark, I think you're going to help us through the Q&A session, and throw questions over to us, and we'll try our very best to answer as many as we can. I think there's 85 I can see at the bottom, so we might not be able to quite get through all of them, but we'll try our best to get through certainly the main ones. Do you want to take us through, Mark?
Yes, that's okay, Tom. Thank you all. So yeah, we'll rifle through them, and for all the questions that we missed, we can answer and follow up afterwards with a Q&A document answering all the questions, as I realise we're not going to get through them all today in the webinar. But starting with a question from Linda: will you be waiting until the application is closed on the 31st to appraise the stage 1 applications, or will you be accessing and appraising them as they come in?
Yes, we'll be waiting.
Okay, thank you. If a farmer currently has no storage at all and is in breach of various legislations, will they be eligible to apply for the grant for 6 months of covered storage? So
this has been, I'll be really honest, this has been a really tricky topic for us to deal with across government, because actually we don't generally give lots of grants to people to meet regulatory requirements. but the grant is there to get people to beyond regulatory requirements to a higher standard. What we've said in the grant guidance is that if you are a farmer producing slurry, then you can come in for the grant. Now that might be because actually you only have a few days or a few weeks storage when you should, under the SAFO regulations, have at least 4 months. So the grant is there to get people to well beyond that minimum requirement, as long as you're producing slurry and not switching from a predominantly farmyard manure system onto slurry, that's fine. Obviously, if you're a very small slurry producing farmer, actually the minimum grant amounts might mean you might struggle to reach that minimum threshold. But if you are producing slurry, then you can come in for the grant.
Thank you, Tom. And just a reminder to sort of background colleagues in the Catchment Sensitive Farming and Environment Agency, please feel free to butt in or raise your hand. I'm happy to be interrupted if you want to answer any of these questions, or help to answer any of these questions. So next question is from Mark Waters. So with a limited number of successful applicants in this round, do you know how long we will have to wait for the next application opportunity?
I can't say today when it's going to be. We're hoping to do the grant over multiple rounds. Things change in the background, so I can't say exactly when it's going to be. I think we can confidently say we'd like to do annual rounds, but we have to see how this first round goes, and then we'll go from there. But there will definitely be multiple opportunities, multiple years to apply.
Thank you, Tom. The next question from Hattie. So will there be notes available from this presentation, please? I assume that means the slides, as well as I mentioned, answers to the questions. I hope I'm not getting in trouble by saying that the slides will be shared afterwards, Tom and co, and as well as those answers to the questions that we missed today.
Yeah, and just to reiterate as well, so anything we say today, the guidance as well is the best place to look, because we cover everything in there in lots and lots of detail. So do go to there as well, in addition to this webinar and the materials around afterwards.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Next question is, our farm is in a triple SI area. So how are we supposed to get planning permission for putting a new slurry store in, as it is impossible to get any type of planning in a triple SI area?
Yeah, so we know there are lots of different issues at the moment with planning and slurry stores in particular. It's really hard to say on a case-by-case basis on a call like this, but what I would say is, as part of preparing this grant for launch, we've been working with colleagues in Natural England and the Environment Agency to try and explain to local planning authorities the benefits of slurry storage under this scheme, so that all the particular safeguards we put around it, and particularly the cover requirement, which obviously has a significant ammonia abatement issue, which tends to be the issue around triple SIs, and we're communicating that to local planning authorities and are continuing to work with them to try and smooth that path. There will still be some delays in planning, etc. Part of doing this grant means we can have a sort of look nationally at some of the issues and try to work with the planning authorities and colleagues across government who work on planning to try and resolve those. So I can't promise that they're necessarily going to be unblocked in every case, but we are working really closely with Natural England and planning authorities to try and allow projects to go ahead where they should lead to environmental improvements under the scheme.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Next question from Nick Mullins. So for rented holdings, should the landlord or the tenant apply?
So I will, Ruth, do you want to comment on that? Otherwise, I can have a go.
So yeah, it would need to be the tenant that applies. They're the ones who would be using the store up and getting the output. So it would be the tenant.
And just to add to that as well, so I know some tenants, they've got particular concern about, there's a 5-year requirement for grant funding agreements, etc., and some farmers on shorter tenancies than that. If you look at the scheme guidance, we say quite clearly that if you're on a tenancy agreement that's shorter than 5 years, for example, you're on a 1 or 2 year tenancy, it's absolutely fine to apply, and the RPA will consider applications from tenants on short agreements. You just need to have confidence that you're going to be able to renew your tenancy agreement. You don't have any reason to suspect that your tenancy is going to be terminated within that period. So if you're on a short tenancy, you've got no reason to suspect that you're not going to continue on the farm. Please do come in for the grant as well.
Thanks both. So the next question is from Andy. This is about inflation. So grant support payments would appear to be loosely based on current prices for stores and ancillary equipment. Given that final approval for eligibility will not be until mid-2024, have Defra factored the inflationary rise in prices that will inevitably occur into their funding mechanism? With current inflation rates at 10% plus then a current 50% intervention will look more like 35% in 2024.
Yeah, so it's a really good question, and something that we're dealing with across grants and across all the sort of financial incentives we do, not just in Defra but across government as a whole. You know, you can understand the sort of strain on public finance and dealing with that. But part of the reason we did the standard cost exercise and setting those amounts now is it allowed us to do a really accurate estimate of what the cost of different items are as of today, taking into account inflation over the summer and the recent effects of, you know, increasing prices. We aren't saying today that we will definitely change those prices through time, but we've said if there are exceptional change circumstances, we might look at them again. But the expectation is those are the amounts that will be paid for applicants coming into the first round. But part of the beauty of using standard costs is we can look nationally at what costs are coming in and whether the standard costs remain accurate to those, and we can review those if we need to. But the expectation is the cost that we've set out today, which do take into account recent inflation, will be the amounts that are paid in the first round. I don't know if RPA folks you want to add to that with that.
I know that's.
Thank you, Tom. Next question is from Neil. So given the 13 million budget and given a mid-range claim size of 130,000, that only gives 100 funded projects. Is that the estimated number of projects you're looking to fund in year one?
So we don't have an estimated number of projects we want to fund in the first round. Part of the, I guess, the interesting thing about doing this grant is we don't know really what level of storage farmers want to come in for. So part of the reason we're doing the online checker is to gather that information and to then make a judgment about how many projects we want to fund. There is that published 30 million figure, which we're intending to meet through the first round. But once we've got all that information in, we'll have a really good sense of what the demand is for that first round. We'll be able to make a decision about how many projects we fund after that. And I go back to what both Rob and Ruth said in the presentation then. I would say this is going to be a multi-year scheme. You know, we want to know the total demand. Please do use the online checker to submit an application. It's a pretty quick exercise to do if you think you want to come in for a grant, and then we'll be explaining to everyone our decisions on who's going to be prioritised and how many projects we're funding, etc. in due course once we've closed that checker.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Next question from Tanis. So some farmers are worried about non-compliant stores and telling the RPA/EA about this in their applications. How will non-compliance be handled?
Yeah, sure. So we know that farmers are going to be coming forward with non-compliant stores. That's why we've set up the scheme. There's by submitting data to the Environment Agency, who are going to look at the plans. That's not sort of there for them to police your farm or to come and sort of knock on the door to penalise you. It's because we genuinely want to help farmers build the right storage. If a farm is non-compliant, the best course of action in general is always to be having that conversation with your Environment Agency officer and your catchment sensitive farming advisor anyway, to be looking at your action plans to bring yourself into compliance. But the Environment Agency won't be taking punitive action off the back of the information they get about the storage through the grant scheme. They're there to help us make judgments about projects so you don't end up building or planning something that ends up being non-compliant later on.
Thank you, Tom. And the next question from Beth is, can this grant be used to put a roof over a current slurry lagoon? So
only if you are expanding or altering the store through the grant. So what the grant doesn't do in the first round is just offer covers to fit onto existing stores. There are already grants in the sort of wider Defra family to do that under countryside stewardship. It's one of the things we'll be looking at in the future, where we allow widespread what we call like retrofitting of covers onto existing stores without changing those stores. Just briefly, why we've done that, because it might sound a bit odd. We know there are lots of problems with trying to fit covers onto stores without making other changes to them, without getting like structural assessments of them, particularly when trying to do that on lagoons. So we really wanted to focus public money to start with on projects where we know there's sort of like a no regrets reason to fund them. So that's why we were saying, if you're building a new store, put an impermeable cover on it. We'll look at whether we offer widespread covering of stores in future months.
Thank you, Tom. So next question from Veronica. So in our area, which is the Cumbria and the Yorkshire Dales, the priority numbers identified on Magic exclude many areas with high numbers of farmers on slurry systems, for example, South and Southwest Cumbria. There are no priority areas in Lancashire apart from the Arnside, Silverdale, AOMB, where I think there is just one dairy farmer in the whole area. How were the priority areas designated?
That's a fair comment. We get it a lot. Part of the challenge is if the priority areas did cover every area that had livestock farms in, they wouldn't really help us narrow down much at all. So there is a little bit of a compromise in how those areas were put together. As Rob said when he was talking about it, and there's loads of information we put online about how we put those layers together. As this is an environmental scheme as well as a farm productivity scheme, so I was talking about at the beginning, we have targeted areas where we've assessed action is most urgently needed to address water and air quality, where agriculture is a contributor to that. So that doesn't cover every part of the country, and there are areas of the country where there are significant livestock farming areas where they're not included in the prioritisation area for the first round. We're completely upfront about that, and we've said that given we want to fund a limited number of projects in the first round to avoid swamping supply chains, we are going to prioritise as we have done. But in future rounds, we'll look whether we expand those layers, whether we remove them altogether. It really depends a bit on what the demand is like and what number of applicants we see coming forward for the first round. And once we do close the checker as well, we'll be explaining how we did the prioritisation, how many people put that through, etc. And we'll look at how we change that for future rounds.
Thank you, Tom. How engaged with the various LPAs is Defra? Planning for slurry storage may involve submitting a scale assessment, which could be a major stumbling block to many farms which are very close to sensitive sites. Are the planners and Natural England on board with all of this, please?
Yeah, so a little bit of repetition, the answer I just gave, but yeah, completely understand some of the issues that some farms are having around planning and habitats and air quality assessments at the moment. As I said at the beginning, part of designing this grant was bringing Natural England and the Environment Agency together to look at what we can do to try and smooth the path where actually it will lead to environmental improvements. We are speaking to local planning authorities where there's likely to be priority applications in the first round, and we certainly will be, to understand actually what do they want to see from individual farms when they're submitting their applications. So again, on a call like this, it's really hard to say on a case-by-case basis what the outcome of that's going to be, but just to say we are really aware of the issues, and that Natural England and the Environment Agency is supportive of what we're trying to do with the scheme, that we are working with planning authorities to try and smooth that path where we can.
Thank you, Tom. So next question from Nick. What if you can't get planning permission by the deadline of the full application? It can typically take months to get planning permission for slurry stores, especially if in a designated site.
Do you want to take, we can talk a bit about the window as well?
Yeah, so it is a requirement of the grant that planning permission is in place by the full application. We've extended the window far out to be the end of June 2024, which obviously gives a long period of time to obtain that planning permission. Unfortunately, we have to stick with that rule. It's a key rule of the scheme that you must have planning in place to at the point you submit your full application. As Tom has mentioned, there are going to be future rounds, so it would be likely that you would need to reconsider and look to apply in a future round.
Yeah, just one thing I'd add to that as well is when folks are invited to submit a full application, submitting things to the Environment Agency and the Rural Payments Agency as soon as possible helps us get through that process. The later you leave things, and the later you leave applying for things like planning permission or continuing paperwork, the less likely you are to get through a full application round. So just the message is, submit things as soon as you can, speak to us as soon as you can, and we'll help you as much as we can to get through the applications.
Okay, thanks both. So next question, how many floating covers are available today that have a proven 10-year plus lifespan when fitted and removed annually?
That is I wouldn't be able to answer that off the top of my head. We have been speaking to lots of suppliers and manufacturers as part of preparing for the scheme and putting together the specifications that we've put online. You'll notice that 10-year requirement is actually shorter than the 20-year requirement that we have for stores, which is there to reflect that actually some cover designs don't have the same longevity as the materials being used for stores. So we have tried to take that into account, but we have been speaking to lots of suppliers who are telling us that their wonderful products will last a long time as well.
Thank you, Tom. Next one, so why are slurry separators not included in the grant?
Yep, so we do actually already offer a slurry separator item under our the sort of smaller grant, simpler scheme that we run called the Farm Equipment Technology Fund, which we ran last year, and we're going to run another round of that soon, which should include slurry separators. I know it doesn't include all the types of separator, and particularly for farms on sand, we've had lots of sort of asks, well, can you widen the range of separators and look at things like sand lanes, etc., to allow to build carbon storage? It's something we're looking at for future rounds. We didn't manage to get it in for the first round because we've already got that FETF Farm Equipment Technology Fund offer. We didn't want to necessarily have the two running or duplicating each other, but we will look at it for future rounds of the scheme.
Thanks, Tom. Next one from Henry. If we happen to wait until 2024 to potentially be accepted, and we do not currently have 6 months storage, thus potentially not being legal, will the fact that we are waiting for the scheme be acceptable?
So that 2024 date is the date you have to submit your full application. If you're ready and you've got everything lined up, you can go through a lot quicker than that. We've got RPA and other colleagues on standby to assess applications from the day we invite people through. So what we're really hoping is actually lots of applicants who want to come in for a grant in the first round are able to build stores during the course of 2023. There's the second part of the question about, what's the implication for regulatory action. EA colleagues can feel free to come in after this, but we are, Environment Agency has been really keen in working with us on the scheme. They know that farmers will be coming in for a grant and might be considering that as part of their action plan, and there will be, some understanding of that. Obviously, it's really hard to say again on a call like this because it will be a case-by-case basis. But Josh or Connor, is there anything you want to add to that from a Environment Agency perspective? Was that covered?
I guess the general message is just to come and talk to us, get in contact with your local officer and have that conversation about what steps you need to take to, if you are planning on applying for the grant, then there obviously might be things you can do to reduce the risk in the meantime, but that's going to be situation specific, and the best person to speak to about that is your local officer. But everyone who knows they're not compliant needs to have a plan as to how they're going to bring their storage into compliance. That's the really important thing.
Thanks, Josh. Mark, do you want to?
Yeah, thank you both. So next question from Joanna. You said that farmers could only apply for 6 month storage according to existing cow numbers. What happens if they have been impacted by TB and are below usual numbers or something similar?
So if you look at the scheme guidance, we say quite clearly that I'm going to find the exact wording. The 6 month calculation should be based on typical livestock numbers. Have you got it in front of you?
No,
but
okay. You're going that
I'm
way.
going the right direction. The typical we had extensive conversations with this when we were putting the grant together. it should be based on the typical number of livestock you will have kept on your farm for the last year. Is that right? You'll be able to find the exact wording in scheme guidance. That is to allow for circumstances exactly like the one you just raised. We know there are unforeseen circumstances on farm. We want to be as flexible around that as possible, whilst also making sure that we've got a sort of a baseline which everyone is calculating their storage against. So if you have had a TB incident, you've had different changes to your herd, the Rural Payments Agency will be more than happy to consider that.
Yeah.
That's why we reflect that in what we put in the guidance.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, and if you're in that situation, we would advise you to make contact with us, and we can talk through that and how we expect you to answer those questions.
Okay, thank you both. So next question, similar to a theme in terms of working with arm's length bodies and local authorities, but it says, will you be working closely with local authorities? We've had our planning application in for 6 months for slurry storage with our council, which has not been passed and shows no sign of progressing. This is a big concern for us, even if successful in application, due to the length of delay so far.
Yeah, so hopefully won't be repeating too much what I said already, but yeah, we do. I fully recognise that there are planning issues around slurry storage. Those planning reasons can be really diverse, and it's really hard to say, pinpoint what that question is necessarily getting at. And we do know there are constraints of planning authorities about resources, etc. All I can say is we're doing as much as we can to work with Natural England, with Department for Levelling Up, and with planning authorities to try and smooth the path as much as we can. But there will always be constraints and specific issues in certain local planning authorities where it is quite a local matter. But what we've said to a lot of the sector groups we work with, and it's probably some on this call, but if you are getting particular issues, do speak to the organisations that you work with, and we often speak to them so we can understand what the planning issues are particularly around slurry storage, and what we can do with colleagues across government to try and unblock those. So we do what we can, but won't be able to resolve it.
Thanks, Tom. Next question from Mandy. If you are granted an offer, you cannot work until 2024. Is that correct? So that's a working assumption.
No, that's not right. Do you want to talk about that, Ruth?
So the online checker will be open from now until the 31st January. We will then carry out that short listing exercise. Those who are invited to submit a full application can submit that full application as soon as they're able to. So, and we encourage you to do so. There's not then another shortlisting exercise at the end of that process. Once you're invited in, you're able to move through that. There's no kind of getting everyone in and rechecking it and then inviting people in. So please, if you're invited in, you're able to go as quickly as you're able to send us all the information in.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Ruth. Next question. So will bubblers and aeration systems be included as an eligible accessory under the scheme?
So we certainly have agitators under the specifications. You can look at those if you go onto the pages. I don't think we've got bubblers in there off the top of my head. I'm looking at, no, we don't. But we do look to review items in 2 rounds as well. So if you've got particular items that you think should be considered, do drop them to, we can share an email address to share things to after if we go to the FTF rpa.gov.uk email address. If there are particular things you want to include, you can put that in.
Thank you, Tom. Next question from Anthony. Are there any incentives being offered or requirements made to capture methane emissions from the slurry? Methane can be split into hydrogen, which the UK is wanting at present, and CO2, which the UK needs to improve its self-sufficiency of.
Yeah, so there are some really, there's some really innovative companies out there that are doing methane capture from slurry stores. Some of those sort of early emerging technologies that aren't really sort of like available really easy off the shelf, but we do speak to a lot of the manufacturers of those sort of suppliers. The way we've written the specification for the covers, there are some of those systems that you could look at those and might be able to use the cover option to part fund some of that. But we're not sort of saying here are methane systems you can buy using the grant. Though that is something we'll continue to look at for future rounds. But as I said, a lot of those technologies are only just emerging, and it's quite hard to fund them through like a national grant scheme until they're readily available, sort of market available solutions.
Thanks, Tom. From Stuart, can you continue to use an existing inadequate capacity store as a reception pit and then pump to the new 6 months compliance store?
You'd have to meet the current requirements for reception pits, wouldn't it, in terms of construction?
So what we've said is that you can keep stores as part of your system so long as they're compliant with regulations. So if that reception pit is was built to the right standards and is otherwise compliant, then that would presumably be fine. When you go through to submit your full application, the EA will probably look at that and just double check that that does make sense from their perspective. But I don't know if Josh or Connor, you'd have any initial thoughts on that. I know it's really hard to tell without seeing the case, but
if it was a compliant store, it would be okay to do it. You would have to understand the reasons why they're not using it as part of their slurry storage calculations. If it's already compliant, it would be included. That's my thought.
Yeah, thanks, Connor. So yeah, I think the key there is it's the compliance of how the store is constructed rather than the size. Because obviously, if you're building a new store, it's not the size that matters; it's the compliance bit. Hopefully that answers that one.
Thanks all. Next question from Anthony. If you own more than one pig farm, for example, can you make an application for each farm, or are you restricted to a single application?
Yeah, so if you again, I think we've got this in the guidance. The maximum grant amount of 250,000 is capped per business. So if you've got multiple farm holdings, you can apply multiple times, but you can't go over that maximum cap for your business.
Next question from Veronica. This is a comment. It would be helpful if there was one grant scheme for all the equipment and infrastructure required for managing slurry. At the moment, there's a Slurry Infrastructure Grant, the Stewardship Water and Air Quality Grants, and the Farming Equipment and Technology Fund. This is confusing for farmers. So, Ed, do you want to come in on that, Tom?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really fair comment and something that we're looking at. So that there's always there's two ways of, well, I would say there's two ways of looking at it. So that the equipment grant, Farm Equipment Technology Fund, is meant to be a simple grant to apply for because it's lower value items, it's more straightforward. We don't want to take things out of there, for example, like low emission spreaders, slurry scrapers, etc., and actually make it as part of necessarily a bigger grant because actually, not everyone wants to go in for storage. They might already have great storage and just want to apply for a couple of items. That said, I do appreciate, it can be a little bit confusing having different items in different places. The countryside stewardship point, but that is something we're looking at whether over time we sort of try and make that all under one scheme rather than having that slightly confusing set of offers in one that looks slightly different to another. That's something we'll be looking at over the future. But yeah, fully appreciate that there is a slightly complicated mosaic of grants, but it's something we're looking at to improve going forward.
Thanks, Tom. Next question from Nick. So what should farmers with more than one holding do? Should they calculate per holding or consider all the holdings together? What if they have a rented and owned holding? What if new storage is required on both holdings?
Yeah, so I would do it per holding because it's about where the livestock are on that farm and where the storage is required for those livestock. So calculate per holding your storage requirement. As I said, going back to that previous answer, if you are a business that had multiple holdings over multiple sites, you can apply multiple times as long as you don't go over that cap.
Yeah, that's correct. What I would say is the checker's not going to know you're the same you're the same business, it's not going to do that capping for you. Submit your project per holding through the online checker. We'll pick that up through our duplicate kind of checks, and then we'll make contact with you and work and talk you through how best to apply, because it is not straightforward, but fundamentally we'll cap you at 250. So we'll work out how you want to split that across your project. So apply and then contact the RPA, and we'll talk you through how best to actually manage that in reality.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Next question from Pippa. Is this grant available for those in countryside stewardship with outstanding capital items within the same field parcel as an existing slurry store, which may be included in this grant?
Yes, there's no reason why you couldn't apply for this grant if you were under CS.
Thank you. From Mandy, how do you stir slurry lagoon that has a fixed cover?
We do have the different agitator options that we have under the specifications. The other thing I would say, and Ruth and I think both colleagues mentioned this earlier, when part of the reason we're offering catchment sensitive farming advice visits, they'll be able to help think about what's the best option for your farm based on your system. When you're thinking about things like how the slurry gets to the store, looking at things like mixing, etc. So talk to your CSF advisor about that as well.
Thanks, Tom. Next question from Fiona. Will you be providing a list of civil and structural engineers that will be qualified to carry out the signing off? Is there a guide to the cost of signing off the structure, and will this be included in the grant?
So we haven't produced a list. We've said that they should be suitably qualified. I expect is that maybe something we could provide a bit more information
a bit more information on that in due course.
Okay. Thanks both. So approaching 13 minutes left, so we'll speed through as much as we can. Next question is 2027 still the deadline for existing stores to be covered?
So, the idea of having stores covered was something that was set out in the Clean Air Strategy, which is something that the government published, I think, back in 2019. There hasn't been a formal consultation on that requirement yet, so that is not something that's fixed in law. However, there is an expectation that Defra will consult on it at some point. Until that happens, I can't say but definitively that date would be put in motion, but at the moment there's no legal requirement for stores to be covered and not to be covered in 2027.
So next question. So with RPA on strike from the 13th of December for a month, how is this going to affect deadlines?
I'll take that one. Obviously you've seen that there are dates for upcoming for RPA strikes. So we still we've got established and tested plans so we can continue to deliver our services farmers in any kind of events that may cause disruption, including industrial action. The actual team that supports the farming transformation fund and the Slurry Infrastructure Grant aren't a part of the cohort that will be striking, but as an agency we'll need to be working to make sure that we're covering all of those channels coming in. We don't expect there to be any detrimental impact because of the plans that are in place. So yeah, we don't expect there to be any issues with that.
Okay. Thank you, Ruth. Next question from Hattie. When is the next round of the FETF opening, please?
So we're hoping to do it over the winter into the spring. That's a terrible wide range. I haven't got a date I can tell you because we haven't announced it yet, but we will do soon.
Thank you, Tom. Next question. Can you use a floating cover on a slurry tower, or does it have to be on a lagoon?
So as long as it meets the specifications, it would be fine. if you see systems that meet specifications, then that would absolutely work. Yeah, I can see that.
Thank you, Tom. This is a multi-year scheme. How many years will it run?
Don't know. We have to. So part of the reason of as we've been saying along, why we want people to do the online checker and to see the total demand is we want to see how many farmers want to come in for a grant for the conditions that we put to it. So 6 months covering and meeting all the conditions that we put. It's then about going too much to the mechanics. It's like it's our job as Defra to then make the case for why we think the funding should continue over multiple years. So we do want it. We certainly want to do it for the next the years coming up, but then whether we can do it all the way to the end of the decade, for example, is something that we'll have to evidence based on the reception we get from farmers and who's coming in and what and how much take up it's getting. So I know that's a really fluffy answer. I'd love to be able to tell you as well, but it's something we'll need to work out for the time. Okay,
thank you, Tom. Next question from Dan. Can Defra confirm which types of cover are clean air strategy compliant?
So part of the slight dance around my question of whether clean air strategy hasn't yet consulted yet and we haven't yet come up with the law. The options we've come up with this scheme for the first round of building new stores that have impermeable covers on that meet the specifications that we've come up with. Those are like what we see as like absolute no regrets projects, that there is basically no opportunity that will become non-compliant in the future. So that's why we've focused on those cover types for those store types for this first round.
Thank you, Tom. If some of my land is in the priority area, but none of the buildings / slurry storage, am I eligible?
So again, it's really important to say that when we talk about the mapping, it's not ineligible. We'll have to see what the demand is. And then depending on what the demand is, we might go outside those layers, we might have to go further narrow down the layers. We've just published those in advance to give as much detail up front about like roughly where the areas are and supply. When you go for the online checker, you should supply the ordnance survey grid reference of where you plan to build the store. That's the key bit.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Next question from Neil. If you were successful in obtaining a grant, what would be the soonest date that you could start construction?
Do you want to hypothetically take that?
Yeah, I mean, so we would, in reality, we're probably looking at like early spring to tell you that you're able to and provide you with the information to submit the application. And then if you think about what you need to produce to be able to submit full application, so we're looking at store designs, we're looking at completion of the Slurry Wizard, we're looking at providing us with maps. Remind me for something else. So that's quite a lot of information. So however long that's going to take you to get that together, as well as obviously having planning permission in place, that will then come through to us and the RTA. That's, we can't exactly confirm how long that'll take, but probably kind of a month if you're coming in. If you're coming in early, then you'll be able to fill in the rest of your full application. So we'll need to be looking at accounts. We'll need the engineers sign off that it's going to be designed to specification, and obviously all the details of what items you want and the quantity. Again, that's going to take you some time to pull together, and then we can then probably allow another kind of month or so for us to go through that process again. The sooner you do this, the quicker it's going to be for us to turn it around, and then you can enter into the grant funding agreement. It's not until you've signed that you can start construction on your store, and that's a really key message. That could make you ineligible. Then however long you believe the construction will take. In reality, when we're looking at your milestones of when you're going to claim, it's highly unlikely that for these projects you're going to be claiming instantly, because you've got a substantial amount of construction to take place before you submit a claim. So again, you've got to be thinking a number of months before you submit claims. And if you're going for one claim, obviously that's quicker and easier. Obviously, that just depends how you're gonna fund your project. So I've not really given you an answer. I'm just kind of talking you through what the process is. So it depends. It depends on your process.
But just to add a little bit more to that. So I said this to answer earlier, but like the sooner you can submit, better, because we've got colleagues on hand ready to look at applications when we invite to the application. Once you get a grant funding agreement, you can start construction straight away. So that should hold you back. And there was one other point I was going to make that I have now. So carry on, Mark.
Okay. So next one from Aaron. I'm going to fill in a blank in this question. So Aaron, hopefully that fulfills your question desire. But so planning and agent fees, how is that considered or factored in?
So if you look at the specifications for the items, that explains everything that the standard cost covers. If you then look in the grant guidance as well, there's a list of things that the cost doesn't cover. But I think the easiest way to think about it is when you go through the checker, that will give you an amount of like how much you'll get based on what you need, and that you need to budget everything around that, because you might be looking at planning costs, you might be consultancy costs. They'll be different for every farm depending on what it needs, but the standard cost gives you an estimate of how much grant you get based on your storage need.
It might slight different angle of answering that question. It might be a question around, can you pay for project costs up front? And we always say no, you can't commit funds. But if it's different for planning and agent fees, they're not an eligible cost. So you can't kind of pay your agent, pay your planning fees up front to enable you to get through that process.
Okay, thank you both. So the next question is more of a statement, but perhaps Tom, you can talk about the process you went through on deciding the grant sort of offering. But we've got a quote for a covered concrete store for £100 per cubic meter. So the grant is way less than 50%.
Yeah, so there will be. We know there's sort of like quite big differences depending on, what type of store you want to go for, where in the country you are, the sort of specifics of your farm and its layout, etc. So it's, there will be divergence in costs. When we're thinking about putting a grant like this together, there are different choices we can make. The two main options are to do that standard cost that we've used, where we can give a sort of upfront estimate of how much you'll get and make that consistent across the country, or we have a fixed percentage. Now, there are big downsides to using that fixed percentage approach. It means you'd have to go out and get lots of different quotations, and we'll have to take the lowest value one, is usually the way that the Rural Payments Agency does it. And also, it means that we'd have to do much more sort of arduous checks on whether that particular project is value for money. As Rob was particularly saying earlier, this scheme, when you strip it back, is trying to be as simple as possible. We want to strip out some of the submitting, lots of things that we score and lots of things like that, to make a judgment about whether your store is the right thing for us to fund, and to offer up front some really quite simple options of these are different store types that you can choose with set amounts to get you up to 6 months storage to help you on that journey. So I know there will be farms out there who will get have to spend more on their storage time because of where they are, the layout of their farm. That's a judgment that we took when we was discussing it with farmers and others, that we thought this route was much simpler. It's much more upfront, and it makes things much more easy to administer, both for you guys applying and for the Rural Payments Agency's administrators, than going down the route of you having to submit lots of quotes and then us making judgments about whether we think that is or isn't worth funding. So I know that balance won't work for everyone, but that's the judgment that we came to. You can agree or disagree with that. And then in terms of how the costs were calculated, we concluded that exercise over the summer with an external consultancy who costed these for us and took into account all the sort of different factors in storage, cost to construction, to regulation, and the standards set out in the Syria industry best practice guidance. So they are pretty representative of a standard project, but there will always be differentiation out there.
Thank you, Tom. So that's brought us to 4 o'clock. There is one more point, which is quite timely, from Liz Sellis. So Liz says, I would think you should bother to answer all the questions, even if it's on the blog or something after the event. So many important ones here. Liz, agree with that. And yeah, as I mentioned, we will be going through and answering those questions and circulating those answers afterwards. So Tom and Co will have a lot of work to do. I think there's still 97 questions to be answered.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And I would just reiterate again, if you do have questions, many of them are answered in the guidance, so we will likely just be pulling out answers from the guidance. But yeah, we can. I'm happy to help pull those together. I just want to say before you wrap us up, Mark, thank you very much to the. At one stage, I think we had over 320 people on the call. We've dropped off a little bit just as we've got into some of the technicality, but I want to thank everyone for coming along, and to Ruth and for Rob for talking as well. And I hope we will see many of you folks applying and working through as well. Yeah, messages do go and look at the guidance, and if there are further questions, there are routes advertisers aware for your RPA to raise further questions. But Mark, as you want to wrap us up.
Yeah, no, just follow on from that and say thanks everyone for turning up and asking those questions. Everyone's clearly really engaged, and thanks to my colleagues. Tom, very impressed. Had an answer for everything, and I think that shows a testament to the co-design process, that a lot of things were considered. All the questions seem to be considered up as part of that process. So yeah, thanks all for coming, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.